first in what will be a series of short video clips in which I'll be talking about my experience of compassion focused therapy and compassionate mind training. My name's Chris, and before we start, I think it's important to make it clear that I'm not an expert. I'm going to be talking about my experience of compassionate mind training and how CFT, compassion focused therapy, helps me to manage clinical depression. So I'm not recommending, and I'm certainly not going to be offering advice. I'm just going to be sharing some information which may or may not be of interest to you. It's really important, if you do need help, please reach out to any helplines or support that's in your local area. And whilst compassionate mind training can be used by anyone in both clinical and non-clinical settings, I think it's very important to note that it can be challenging. It takes some time to work through some of the exercises, and because it uses some mindful practices, that also can open up to reveal some powerful emotions, some powerful memories. So if you think those things could be surfacing, please do again reach out for some professional help and guidance. It's really important that happens. And I should also say that on that point, there is nothing wrong or to be ashamed with going to seek some help from a therapist or a counsellor. I delayed, I avoided it for too long until I reached a crisis point. So I understand how it feels, and it really is important for you to reach out and seek help and talking therapy, which may be something that helps you. So I discovered compassionate mind training, which is part of CFT, during 2017 when I was in therapy, and I was very fortunate to come across a therapist who used CFT. That was actually a happy accident. I'd never heard of CFT before, and it really eventually helped me to, first of all, acknowledge depression, and then to work and manage through some very difficult emotions. And I believe it's been personally life-changing, and that's a bit of a cliche. It also led on to something called hashtag 365 Days of Compassion, which the channel here on YouTube is named after. I'm going to talk about that in one of the later episodes, I think, because what I really thought would be very useful in this first episode was to perhaps spend a little bit of time just to explore the word compassion, and that can mean a number of different things to people, depending on situations and the context. It can be interchangeable with other words perhaps as well, like empathy, kindness, sympathy. Being a bit of a geek, I find it very fascinating that within the scientific community around compassion focused therapy and compassion focused therapy supports, that there is discussions about what actually we mean by the words such as compassion. I'm going to use the definition that is used within one of the books from Professor Paul Gilbert. Now, Professor Paul Gilbert developed CFT. He went on to found with others the Compassionate Mind Foundation, which supports therapists in learning around CFT, and also the use of CMT in non-clinical settings as well. So the definition that I'm going to use, and I'd just like to spend a few minutes on this episode exploring it, is that compassion is a motivation, and that is a sensitivity to suffering in self and others with a commitment to try and alleviate and prevent. Now, I think that's a really interesting definition because it breaks down into two sections. Sometimes they're referred to as the two psychologies of compassion within CFT. But for me, there are two key words that really come out in that definition. So the first part of it, a sensitivity to suffering in and others. For me, the key word there is sensitivity. And built around that are certain other concepts, such as tolerance and acceptance. So this is actually being sensitive to pain, to your emotional distress. This is why I said earlier that CMT, compassionate mind approach, is challenging. And I should also say that if you're suffering from depression, being asked to do something where, first of all, it's a motivation, when depression really does steal away motivation, and then actually being encouraged to sit with very powerful emotions is a challenge. But that sensitivity is key, but it takes some time and you have to work through it. And note that it's actually sensitivity to others and self as well. So this is not avoiding or trying to stay away from something, it is actually facing it. The second part, which I think is really interesting of that definition, is the word commitment. And for me, this is where the motivation piece comes in. There's also a piece in that definition where it also says, if you can try to alleviate and prevent. That's an interesting piece as well, because the other piece I think that comes with this is some wisdom, because sometimes we cannot necessarily solve the thing that's causing the pain or the distress. Sometimes we can. So within that definition, there's quite a lot happening. We've got some work with strong emotions, being courageous and actually facing them. Something that can sometimes help with that is being curious about those emotions. That may sound slightly cliched. I'm curious about why I feel sad. But actually, if we can just explore that, we may be able to get to the underlying root of the distress, which then may allow us to consider how we will be able to alleviate or prevent it. So it's not easy to do, and within Paul's work he clearly explains why this is hard to do, but actually how we got to be here with these tricky brains, as it's often referred to within compassionate mind training. Paul's work is specifically based around evolutionary psychology and neuroscience, around the way that our brain has developed, and particularly in the way that it reacts to things like anger, inner criticism, and how we're often, our worst critics and terrible judges of ourselves. I'm going to cover that in more detail in future videos, because I think there's quite a lot there that would be helpful to look at. But it is very clear that often our mental well-being has been impacted because of some of the emotional systems that have evolved to look after us, but in this modern world, that can cause us some problems. And this is why one of the key parts of CFT is the compassionate mind training, because we're actually working to retrain certain of our behaviours and actions that have been with us almost from birth. One thing I'm going to look at in much more detail in the next episode is a key concept of CFT, which is around 3 emotional regulatory systems that we have. I can remember the moment that this would start to be drawn up. We represent it by 3 circles during a therapy session, and it was a bit of a light bulb moment. So it really started to explain certain things to me, and it's a model that I think is elegantly simple, in that I think as a concept it's fairly easy to grasp, but there's a lot behind it. So that'll be next episode, I'm also going to try and aim to finish each episode with a recommendation if you'd like to learn more. I'm not selling or getting any commission for this. It's just things that you may or may not be interested in, and it may help as the videos go on to perhaps something to go off and explore. I've already mentioned Paul Gilbert, the man that kind of created CFT and developed it, and he's written quite a number of books, and the one that tends to get recommended quite a lot is The Compassionate Mind, which was written about 10 years ago, within which Paul describes both some of the key concepts of that evolutionary psychology I talked about, how the neuroscience around compassion, etc. works. But then in the second half of the book are some practical exercises and guidance on how you can start on that journey. But actually the book I'm going to recommend is one that Paul actually co-authored with a guy called Chodron, if I pronounce that correctly. The reason that I like this one, and it's called Mindful Compassion, is that it was the book that I first read. When I first learnt about Paul's work, I wanted to go off and read something, and that was the book that I read. So it's kind of got a bit of a special resonance for me. The other reason I really like it is that it explains what mindfulness is and isn't, and also has a lot of very good practical guidance on developing some of the exercises that support compassionate mind training. I think it's a great introduction, and it's also a very helpful book. I'm going to put some links in the description of this video as well, so there's a couple of things that you can go up and have a look at. So that's the first episode. My imposter syndrome and my self-critic are right now raging in my head, so I think it's probably about time that I start to wrap it up. I hope it's been of interest. I hope you can join me for a second episode in a few days where we'll take a deeper look at emotional systems. So until next time, be gentle with yourself and take care. Bye.